had the pleasure of creating and directing this show that we're about to see. I wanted to give you a little bit of background on this show and thank a couple people before we began. So this show is based entirely on interviews that I conducted last spring, between February and May, more or less. And a couple correspondences were online, but for the most part I met with people one-on-one, recorded our interviews, and then was able to transcribe and edit down the content for length, clarity, cohesion into the show that we're about to see today. And so the reason I wanted to bring that up is because each of the stories that you're about to see is the story of a real person that I have met. And for the most part, I tried to keep it in their own words. And so this isn't just something that I kind of created out of nothing. These are based on real people. And so with that in mind, please be aware that the content of the show is pretty heavy, and there might be some distressing or triggering topics discussed, like suicide. And so if you ever feel distressed, feel free to step out. I also have 2 counselors on call who are in the back corner. I've got Dorothy back there, Linda over there. And so if during or after the performance you feel like you need to speak with a licensed counselor, please feel free to speak with either of them in the back 2 corners of the house. And so I'm very appreciative to them for being here and for being a resource for me throughout this whole process. A couple other people I want to thank are Theater TCU for supporting my project and allowing me to use this space, the Chancellor's Leadership Program, and my advisor, Vanessa Roberts-Bryan, for teaching me about social change and guiding me through this process. Everyone who I interviewed for being vulnerable with me and making this show possible. My amazing cast for being such a pleasure to work with and putting a lot of heart and diligence into this project. And lastly, my production team, from the people in the booth to my stage manager, Collin, Pittmann, and my assistant director, Rachel Poole. And so the last announcement I want to make is that immediately following the show, there will be a talk back in the house. And if you haven't been to a talk back before, basically it's the opportunity for the audience and the creative team to kind of discuss the show. You can ask questions about our process, about the writing of the show, the directing of the show, how the actors felt about different things, me and the production team and the actors will be on stage. And so that'll be short, probably about 15 minutes immediately following the show. And so with that, if you could please silence your cell phones, and enjoy the show.
I did not expect this. It hit me like a truck.
It happened in the bathtub one day out of the blue.
Everything was okay, and then it wasn't.
Those weeks and months were honestly a blur. I just remember lots of praying and pain and my mom crying silently in her room and just utter fear.
One week I had to cancel my shifts at work twice. I couldn't get out of bed because I was so sad.
I was very, very overwhelmed, and it was scary to move forward.
I rolled around in my little twin-size bed, just writhing in pain, begging it to stop.
For me, it was a lot of substance use, just kind of masking what I was feeling.
I just don't feel comfortable in my own skin anymore, and that's really hard.
Mental illness is very confusing.
I didn't go to therapy because my dad was very much someone who believed that if you were sad, you could just get over it.
I come from a family where mental health sort of carries a stigma. You don't really go to therapy, and if you do, you don't tell anyone. You don't talk about it, you just swallow.
I just kind of had to suffer.
My husband's personality was ripped away from him, and there's nothing he can do about it.
From the moment they told me to just stop thinking about it and to just keep praying and it'll go away, I knew there was no fundamental way they could understand.
She was like, this is why boys don't like you. It's because you're the fat girl and no one wants to be around that.
I just want somebody that's gonna look at me without that wall.
For a while, I told people I didn't think I was gonna make it out of my 20s because it was getting so bad.
I kind of see myself from hospitalization to hospitalization because that's the way my mental illness has gone.
I get scared of falling back into a phase, the OCD state, where nothing seems okay anymore.
I was 14 years old when I first got drunk. And the younger someone is when they start drinking, the higher the risk of developing an alcohol dependency later in life.
I've just been walking around with so much embarrassment and shame being the girl who struggles with an eating disorder.
I didn't understand that the tangible pit in my stomach was a forest fire of misplaced guilt, growing and growing the more I tried to bargain with it.
I didn't know how to stop it or anything.
I think for a long time I knew I had a problem. I just wasn't ready to stop.
There's lots of reasons a home can become broken. I guess I was just a product of that framework.
The confessions never ended because the thoughts never did. How come no one else had to confess every single bad thought they had or things they ever did?
people who commit suicide, they're trying to escape. They're trying to get away. It's really sad.
I'm a very happy person. That's my normal. I just haven't been like that for a while.
How does this cacophonous anxiety not show on our skin? Through our eyes. Can't you see it, friends?
Body image and my relationship with food has been an issue my entire life. My sophomore year of high school was, for lack of a better word, my chubby year, and my mom hated that. She's the type of person who puts a lot of worth in someone's physical appearance, and since I wasn't like a size 0, she hated that. And she would say really cruel things to me like, "You're gross," and "I'm embarrassed of you," or "You should be embarrassed of yourself." And she would limit me to like a yogurt a day until I lost X amount of weight, or she would be like, "You don't lose 30 pounds by this day. I'm taking you out of theater. I'm taking you out of cheer." And that was really hard. And then when I did lose the weight because I was doing really unhealthy things, she was nice to me again. Starting my time at my first university as a musical theater major, I knew that there was going to be a lot of emphasis on watching what I was eating and working out. And I did that. I was watching what I ate, but I was healthy about it. I was making sure I met my nutritional needs for the day. I was working out just to feel good about myself and move my body rather than make it look a certain way. And then, in the fall of my sophomore year, I was cast in the musical Chicago, which was really exciting. But, I also knew that I was going to be on stage in lingerie in front of hundreds of people. And so I took it upon myself to look as physically fit as possible. Because if I at least looked the part, then no one could criticize my performance. That was my mindset. And so I started restricting my eating. I was training myself to eat less and less calories. I was working out twice a day outside of my dance classes, and so I lost a lot of weight really fast. And not that the number matters, but just for context, I was never really able to get below 130, and by the time Chicago opened, I was down to 115. And everyone was like, "Oh, you look so good, I'm so jealous of you." And while I'm sure these things were coming from a good place, it was really just acting as fuel to the fire. So when Chicago closed, instead of transitioning myself back into a normal routine, I thought to myself, if I gain the weight back, I'm a failure. And so I upped everything. I was eating less, I was working out more, and by the end of the semester, I was down to 100 pounds, and that was not okay. I would wake up, and I would have a coffee and an egg white and call it a day. I would sleep as much as possible to avoid any signs of hunger. It got to the point where there was not a number on the scale that I would be happy with. I would reach a new goal, and I would be like, well, I could lose more. It was a never-ending cycle.
If I can count the really bad bouts of depression in my life, it'd be around 2. And when I mean depressed, I mean I didn't eat. One time I lost 50 pounds just because I had no appetite, which is really weird, because I love food, No, the only thing I saw or noticed for a long time was how dark my room was. When I got to college, I dealt with depression. And I haven't been genuinely happy in a really long time, and there are a myriad of reasons as to why that is, but the biggest one has to deal with not fitting in. I knew coming to college that I would struggle mentally. I'm away from my family. I don't have any of my friends here. I don't exactly fit into this school in many ways. The first semester was just really rough. I basically buried myself in my studies, and it's not that I didn't have friends. I just had no motivation to hang out with them. To put it in a word, it would be checked out. I felt like I was on autopilot. Every morning I would wake up and I'd want to cry, and then I'd go to class, and then I'd drag myself back to my bed, and then I'd eat sometimes, and then I remember one night I was walking around at campus alone, just walking and crying. And I didn't know what to do. I became very suicidal. I set a date, and that's when I knew it was really bad. I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't do anything, but even then, my friends and my family needed me. So I stayed afloat, you know?
Well, my parents were drug addicts. My paternal family is severely mentally ill, all of them for different reasons. So it kind of came to me naturally. But I never claimed the title of depressed person or anything like that. I mean, I knew I was a drug addict. That was really the only thing I knew. I started going to prison when I was old enough to get into the prison. I'll be 44 in November, and I've been basically under the supervision of the state of Texas since I was 14 years old. I've never been convicted of a violent crime, never been convicted of a drug crime. Anything I've ever been convicted of is paper crime or theft or anything to support my addiction. Prison, it's a pretty severe environment for an 18-year-old kid to be in. It doesn't make you a more peaceful person. Nothing about it does. I came into the prison a drug-addicted adolescent, a product of a broken home, didn't know how to get through life other than the one coping skill he learned growing up, which was to get high. But you can't do a lot of that in prison. So you have to find another way to get by, and what ended up happening with me is what ends up happening with a lot of other people, in that I got involved in a gang for a lot of years. Because of my involvement in the gang, I became acting captain over Johnson County for 10 years. Now, the state of prison found out about that, and they put me in solitary confinement. 6.5 years. Yeah, for 6.5 years.
After I graduated from TCU, I took the first job I could find working at a dentist office, and I hated it. I started crying at work, and I couldn't stop crying. Every day I would cry all day. So I decided that I needed to get help. But the help wasn't fast enough, so I went to the hospital, and they diagnosed me with generalized anxiety disorder. But after a month of hospitalization, things weren't getting any better, so they changed the diagnosis to major depression. The medication started kicking in. I got on lithium and eventually got a good job. And then something just magical happened. It's still magical no matter how long ago it was. I was working at an outdoor education center, and there were these campfires, and we were learning about Native Americans, and there were these giant teepees. It was just beautiful. I started needing less and less sleep, and then one day I put my hand on a teepee and I thought, I am the descendant of a Native American. That's what I believed. So I got in my car and I decided I was going to drive to New Mexico to teach children about Native American traditions. Luckily, I stopped by my grandmother's house first because I believed there was Native American blood in her, and my father and my husband decided I needed to go to the hospital. But I still believed in everything that I saw, so I saw this hawk fly across the window, and to me that was a symbol of Native Americans. I thought their people had broken in and they were trying to get me out of the hospital. It was a mess of a time. But then they changed my diagnosis to bipolar disorder, and suddenly everything made sense. The mania, the depression, the psychosis. There are two sides to bipolar disorder, and the mania is great. You feel so good, like you can do anything, like you're on top of the world. And then the other side, the depression, is awful. It's really bad. I've had 4 people commit suicide in my lifetime, and it's like you can't see the world. It's like your eyes are closed and everything is dark, and you feel like you want to die. For me, I didn't want to eat anything. I felt completely numb and worthless and hopeless and sad. I was just thinking of ways that I could get out of the darkness so I could just die. Somebody would be driving a car and I would think, okay, I'm just going to jump out of that car and maybe somebody would hit me. Or I'm going to jump out of the car and jump off that bridge that's coming up. It got to a point where the only thing that was going through my mind was, okay, how am I going to die? How am I gonna die? How am I gonna die?
My brother died when I was in 8th grade. My winter break of my sophomore year would have been his 30th birthday. And so my mom and my sister and I decided to celebrate. And we ordered in a bunch of his favorite food. And that was kind of the snapping point for me because I'd been like starving myself for the past 6 months. There was all of this food and there was such an emotional attachment to it. And I just couldn't stop eating. You know, I'd been dealing with all the sadness surrounding my brother's stuff and I was dealing with my own stuff. And so I just started to binge constantly. And I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't want to talk about it. And the people who were there for me, I didn't want them there, and so I turned to food. And, you know, obviously then I started to gain the weight back, and that was really hard considering where I was a couple of months ago. And I thought that, you know, starting over at a new university would be the answer to my problems, but it wasn't. I really underestimated how hard it would be as a third-year student starting over at a new university with a new environment and a new major, all while trying to reconfigure who I was as a human being. And so I struggled in silence with binge eating a lot last semester, and I didn't tell anyone about it. It was something that I kind of just dealt with on my own.
My family was eating dinner at my in-laws' house. It was getting late, so I laid my 18-month-old son down to sleep until it was time to leave. I walked over to the table where my husband was sitting with his older brother and his 14-year-old cousin. He had had a couple of glasses of wine, and he was droning on and on about how our son had to be better than him. That he was the scum of the earth, and our son had to be better than him. I found this to be odd, but I brushed it off and attributed it to the alcohol. About 10 minutes later, my husband was getting really worked up. His brother was telling him that he was doing great. He had a home, a job, a family. But my husband just kept getting more and more despairing and angry, yelling back at him, "No, no, you don't understand!" He threw back his chair and headed straight for the door. I tried to stop him, but he turned and looked straight through me with such anger and sadness in his eyes. He ran out into the darkness with chaotic recklessness. Everyone went out to look for him. I mean, there was a river, train tracks, and a highway all within walking distance, and every second that he was gone, I couldn't help but imagine his dead body. A death that would have been cold and lonely. We found him by the school baseball fields covered in mud. His brother had to wrestle him to the ground to put him in the car. I tried to touch him, but he was being aggressive toward everyone. When we got home, my son had woken up. I went and stayed with my child in a locked room and watched the movie Coco. While my toddler was laughing at Dante the Zolo dog, my husband was outside being held down on the ground by his older brother.
I was 8 when my mom got the call that my grandma had killed herself. And I was 8. I was like, I don't know what this means. And it wasn't until I got older that I realized what happened with my grandma. My sophomore year of high school, I started dating this guy, and I got super cliquey with him. I left all of my friends, and then I started dealing with depression, like really bad. I was always sad. I would take my problems out on him, and I would tell him too much, you know? So he got scared and broke up with me, and I didn't really know how to handle that, and that led to what my mom, my therapist, and I call spirals. They're basically like anxiety attacks with depression in them, and I just start spiraling into this black hole, and I just hate myself. I'm scared, I'm sad, it's a constant crying, and I don't know how to stop it or anything. The night that he broke up with me was probably one of the worst. I just sat in my room in this constant pool of fear and anxiety and depression. I had suicidal ideation, and that led to really scary thoughts where I considered killing myself. That happened all through my sophomore year. But then I got involved in this church community. I went on this Catholic retreat called Kairos, and it changed my life forever. We did this thing where we share a witness, basically tell a story of our life and everything bad that's happened to us and how God has helped us through those experiences. And it was super impactful for me just to write down my whole story and then hear their stories. So I guess that opened my eyes to what other people go through and kept me from feeling like
I was alone. By solitary confinement, I mean 23 hours a day. No human contact at all. You get your food through a little hole in the door, and if they feel like giving you a shower that week, you might get to bathe. Now, you'd expect someone in this situation to have committed some pretty heinous act. And I'll be the first to tell you, I've done some horrible, horrible things in my life. But it became frighteningly clear that solitary confinement was filled with people just like me. Just got caught up in the wrong thing. Eventually, they let me out of solitary confinement, and a couple years later, I came home. Luckily, I have a terrific support system. I got a beautiful wife and kids, and my family's really supportive. I went back to school. I got a pretty good job, and I loved it. A couple years later, I came home from work one day, and I sat in this bathtub filled with hot water, and it's like a flash. I didn't hallucinate, right? It wasn't like that. But it started happening more, and I just was transported to another emotional time. And what it flashed me back to was that cell where I spent 6.5 years. And then I started having these panic situations where I didn't feel safe, and I felt like my kids weren't safe, and they were in school. They were fine. But I had this overwhelming urge to get them home and get them safe. I started having these, I don't want to call them disassociations, but I spent a lot of time in my head, somewhere else. It's difficult to describe. But I knew I was having a problem, right? So I went to some doctors and psychologists, and as soon as they started hearing my story, I could just feel their wall go up. I was sorely disappointed in the medical system and those doctors. But I finally found someone that would take me. Someone that was going to look at me without that wall. She diagnosed me with PTSD. I said, wait a minute, PTSD, how the hell did I get that? Because all you hear of people for PTSD is police officers, firefighters, assault victims, rape victims, survivors. I mean, you never consider you could get it another way. And, it wasn't the prison per se that did this to me. I spent a lot of time in prison before my stint in solitary confinement, and I came out unscathed every time. I didn't have flashbacks, I didn't have disassociations, I didn't do any of that any of those other times. When I sat in that cell for 6.5 years, it changed something in me. Something that I feel will never be repaired. Sure, it can be maintained or worked on, but sometimes I feel like I'll be broken forever. And I'm going to tell you, it cripples my relationships. Kids, my wife, they're so supportive, and they love me, and they know the deal. But it changes things. And I think what frightens me the most is there's no awareness for this kind of thing.
I knew I wasn't alone, but you can't really tell that just from walking to class or something. Like, you couldn't tell I had a date to commit suicide by walking to my math class or something. The worst part about it was that it wasn't just like this one thing that happened that I had to learn to cope with, It was every single day of my existence. Like, that's how I felt, And I know that first semester is less than 6 months in terms of how long you're at school, but it felt like forever. I sought counseling when my resident assistant told me I was looking a little downtrodden. I guess I wore my heart on my sleeve or something, because every RA in my building either told me to go to the counseling center, or they would ask me, are you okay, do you need help? And so then I made the decision that was best for me, and I sought counseling. And through that, and through winter break, I took time to recollect myself and really prioritize my own happiness. And I've been doing better since. I mean, I still get bouts of depression here and there, and sometimes they really blindside me and they're just very sudden. To help someone view it from my perspective. Imagine it's just gray. You know when it's cloudy, and there's no sun, and you don't feel any heat, and everything is just still. Well, that's how I felt for the majority of my first semester. That's how I still feel sometimes. But it's okay. The sunny days are coming back.
Someone swerved past my rigid yet unsteady body, narrowly avoiding my arm. I had stopped in the middle of the walkway on my university's campus, and unapparent to me, I was in the way. I was physically sick with a piercing anxiety and on the brink of crumbling into a pile of self-induced panic. To the rest of the world, I must have seemed perfectly fine. Students shuffled past me like I was just another emotionally numb college student just trying to get to her next class. I could feel the thoughts screaming at me the entire time. Could anyone else feel their thoughts? I stared at the ground for a second. I thought, I'm gonna go batshit crazy this very second. My brain is going to explode. Then I'll die. I could envision black smoke blowing out of the folds and grooves of my brain. I was melting. Death by thoughts seemed imminent to me. Here I was in the trenches of obsessive compulsive disorder. I bet you're wondering how this is OCD. Where's the germophobia? Where's the aligning of the picture frame? My story shows the unknown side of obsessive compulsive disorder, intrusive thoughts. This is where the obsessions are anxiety-inducing thoughts on certain topics, and the compulsions are like mental rituals, like reassurance seeking, that try to make the thoughts go away. We don't feel safe until we've proven the concept of them to be untrue. This being an impossible task is what keeps suffers in its grasp for years. Now, what were my thoughts, you ask? That month had been the culmination of pervasive thoughts that I'd been lying to myself my entire life about my sexuality. About my sexuality. Come on, you're thinking. Everybody deals with that at one point. It's not that big a deal, chill out. If you looked up HOCD, or homosexual OCD, there's a 90% chance you'd think, nah, they're just confused. Let me tell you, there's a difference between harmless wonder and the pervasive, intrusive, and continuous doubt. There's a difference when the thoughts and questions cause you severe distress because of their persistence, 24 hours a day. And I mean literally, there's a difference when it feels like it just doesn't make any damn sense anymore, but you feel shoved in the direction of confessing something anyways. HOCD, or more accurately known as SO, or sexual orientation OCD, since gay people can be just as affected by the disorder, is the reoccurring, debilitating questioning of this fundamental part of yourself. It can be prompted out of the blue after having an ambiguous thought like, wow, she's beautiful. What does this positive yet ambiguous reaction mean? Your brain will question. Anxiety will kick in, and then you become unable to let it go until you've proven to yourself the idea is indeed not true. OCD does not care about qualitative evidence, though. It cares about one thing only: anxiety. We find ourselves completely believing that this broken fire alarm is trying to tell us something, but there's no deeper meaning to this anxiety. It's not natural. This isn't curiosity. It's not harmless. This is mind-numbing and draining, and as many solutions as you think there are, there is no easy way out.
I've been hospitalized a few times before now, but in between, my life has been fairly normal. I've had a good job, I've made good money. One time I went to the hospital because God was talking to me, loudly. A few medications took care of that and I was out. But the last time I was hospitalized, it was because something happened to me at work that reminded me of my past, and I didn't sleep for 4 days. I was psychotic. I was wandering around in the streets and cars were coming at me and my husband had to try to guide me out of the street. And they took me to the hospital. And for a lot of it, I don't even remember what happened. It was the worst psychosis that I have ever had. I was shaking and screaming and doing things that I would not do normally. But that's what the illness does to you. Sometimes it takes you out of where you are and puts you in a place of feeling messed up. In psychosis, I was thinking things that were not true. But there are different kinds of psychosis, and it all just depends on what you're thinking. There's manic psychosis, depressive psychosis, and psychosis all by itself. And, you know, it just all depends on what you're thinking, so when I'm happy in my psychosis, I know that there's something wrong, because I'm happy. I don't care. But when I'm depressed in my psychosis, it's awful. The floor feels like bugs, and they're moving, and you see shadows and people, and it was really scary.
It's really scary. He calmed down at about 1:30 in the morning. We drove home in silence. I parked in our garage. There was nothing. Nothing but the sound of the car humming and the rhythmed breathing of my son asleep in the back seat. I was terrified. My husband couldn't even bring himself to get out of the car. I remember he was so far away. I couldn't help but think, that's not my husband. I told him I'd be back in a little bit to help him, grabbed my son and put him in his crib and kissed him goodnight, saying, everything will be okay, as if to remind myself as well. I took a deep breath and I went back out to help him. I can't let myself break down, not now. I help my husband out of the car. As soon as we get inside, he goes straight for a knife and tries to cut his wrists. I pull him back before he can. He's tired and he has no willpower. I take him to our room and I take off his muddy clothes, get him into some clean pajamas. He's repeating the same phrase over and over. Please kill me. I'm not strong enough to do it. Please kill me. Please kill me. I probably should have called the police at this point, but I didn't. Instead, I rushed around finding all of the prescription medications and knives and anything he could use to hurt himself and hid it in a box in our garage. I went back to stay with him. I put on The Office. We watched it together. I made sure I stayed awake long enough to make sure that he'd fallen asleep. Not that I could fall asleep anyway. This was the night of my husband's psychotic break.
I grew up in a household where my family didn't express emotions very well. I got told there's no reason to cry about it, there's people starving in Africa. I wasn't allowed to express my emotions because they were wrong. I was put down for trying to share them. So I kept a lot of feelings bottled up inside. My anxiety and depression got worse over time. I didn't know what to do with all of these emotions. So I decided to drink. And it just went downhill from there. I went to alcohol because, I don't know, I wanted the pain to go away so badly. And I thought alcohol could mask that pain, but it actually exacerbates it. It's a really messed up concept. Throughout high school and college, I never really found healthy coping skills for my mental health problems, so I resorted to alcohol and drugs. Oftentimes, substances can lead to mental health problems, or mental health problems can lead to substance use. And for me, my depression drove my substance use. And I don't know how you stereotype an addict, but usually you don't see them as very successful, but that was very deceiving in my lifestyle because I was successful, getting A's in classes and having a job, so I didn't think that I had a problem. But I was like a full-time addict, never taking care of my mental health and living this life of deception where I got by.
my sophomore year of high school, I attempted suicide. Wasn't successful, so here I am. Then after that, it got harder because I realized that I was gay and my parents were homophobic, so it was hard living in their house. And my family already had a lot of problems within itself, so we fought a lot. And every time we had a big fight, they asked me, no, they demanded that I leave. I was kicked out twice, and the third time I left by my own choice. I told them I was going to leave and never come back, and so I did. I moved in with my best friend at 17. And I graduated high school, and I came to college. And I love it here. But my freshman year was really hard. I made a lot of friends, but there's a toxic group of people. A lot of them were dealing with their own mental illnesses. And no one really paid attention to it until one of them attempted suicide. So that just kind of opened up all of our eyes to like, okay, like we are all kind of dealing with this. And then they started worrying about me, and they wanted me to see a counselor because I told them this is something that I'm dealing with. I wasn't opposed to seeing a counselor because I knew that I needed help. She asked me if I had ever tried to kill myself, and I said yes. And she started asking me questions like how did I do it? I think that she just kind of assumed I was going to do it again. She sent me to a medical facility for the mentally ill who have tried to end their own life or are a threat to their own life. I felt like I didn't belong there. I was there for a week. It's hard to go somewhere to talk to somebody and then be sent away.
I was doing really good all through my senior year. And then I came to college. I actually transitioned really, really well my first semester. I had tons of friends, everything was fine. And then I started getting my anxiety attacks again. Basically, I just kept having these overthinking thoughts of panic and self-doubt, which led into sweating, crying, shaking, scary thoughts in my head, and I didn't know what to do. It's like I was sitting there in this fear and this feeling of being overwhelmed. Since second semesters began, it's probably been like 15 anxiety attacks, really bad ones. Some of my friends started to get scared, so I had to isolate myself so I didn't lose them. And then I started having trouble with my roommate. She's never dealt with mental illness or anything like that before, so this was like a big new thing for her, and she kind of took it out on me. She just kept telling me that I had problems and that I needed to go see somebody, which made me feel even worse because, like, I know I have problems, but I still belong here. And then 2 weeks before spring break, I had a really, really bad anxiety attack where I locked myself in the bathroom for an hour and I just cried and I had thoughts of suicide, and I was like, I don't want to be here anymore because I'm having a really hard time and I need to go be somewhere safe. So I checked myself in at a facility for the mentally ill, and it was probably one of the scariest experiences of my life.
I remember breaking down to my friend at lunch during kindergarten. I had a scary thought. I think my parents are about to die, I told her. Kindergarten. In appropriate shock, she rushed me to the nearest teacher with tears dripping down my face. Honey, what? The confused teacher asked. I think my parents are going to die, I told her through stifled cries. More around this time was my inability to let something happen on only one side of my body. If one arm was wet, the other simply had to be. Did I knock my right shin? The other must be hit in the same spot. This is not a suggestion, my brain commands. This is a must. I wasn't about to go anywhere without equilibrium. In third grade, someone told me what sex was. I remember thinking it was a bad thing that only bad, dirty people did. I distinctly remember the first moment I was genuinely going to pass out. What I now understand as panic, if I didn't confess my inappropriate thoughts. This catapulted constant confessions about every single bad sexual thought I had after that day. I thought about having sex with God one day. I thought about having sex with my sister the next. It flew through my brain. I had to confess it. And I could always feel it coming on. First, the pit in my stomach dropped, then my attempts to calm down before the tunnel vision began, and I lost all control, and then the point where I just gave up. Pain, pain, go away, I mused. Unless you confess, I'm here to stay, it retorted. However humiliating, confessing was always kind of cathartic. I did my job, the panic was gone, I'm clean. I can't even imagine what my parents were thinking. I mean, how could I expect them to decipher the language of a disorder that follows no rules, has no logic? I stayed alone. I stayed afraid, confused. I slept and cried, and begged it to stop, but it did not. So I went to school. I did my homework, and I tried to assimilate myself to the standard of living of that of a 7-year-old, because this disorder does not give you the visible hall pass that lets everyone know that you're walking around with 100 pounds tied to your feet, cotton balls in your brain, and nothing but the omen of how adverse your stomach is to food.
This might be my mom's voice in my head, but she would be annoyed with me whenever I would tell her what I was going through. She would be like, "You don't have an eating disorder, you're fine. You're being annoying. You don't want to be that girl, so stop being that girl." That's what she would say to me, instead of being like, "Yeah, you have an issue. Let's do something about it." And you know, I didn't want to be that girl, so I kept it to myself. I was afraid that if I did share, that all of the friends that I had made wouldn't want to be my friend anymore. But this semester, I decided to tell people about it, and it has been such a relief. Being open and honest about it has been so freeing, and having friends who care about me and want to be there for me is huge. But the biggest support is knowing where my value lies, and how nothing and no one in this world can take that away from me. God created me, and He wrote my story in full before I've even ever had the chance to live it. You know, I would be lying if I said I don't still deal with it. I still find myself putting my worth in the scale, and you know, it's like the lower the number is, the more worthy I am. But it's not going to fix itself overnight. It's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of community, a lot of support, a lot of prayers, and so much grace. You have to give yourself so much grace because you are not going to be perfect.
The next morning, I looked around for a doctor so that my husband could get a tetanus shot. The night of his psychotic break, he had fallen pretty badly into some barbed wire and scraped up his back. We went to the doctor, and I told him about that night, and he looked at us really concerned. He suggested that my husband go see a therapist and a psychiatrist. So I called around. The therapist was easy to find, and my husband loves him. But getting a psychiatry appointment for somebody who needs help fast is next to impossible. The places I was looking at didn't have openings for 3 to 6 months. My husband was still in psychosis. He started hallucinating. He would laugh uncontrollably for no reason. He started repeating things like, "What's happening with 5 and 12 over and over compulsively. And at times he would experience aphasia, which is difficulty with language. About a month later, we found somebody. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Did you know that schizophrenia is one of the most disabling diseases? It comes right behind quadriplegia and dementia. And when you hear it, it's terrifying. It's Russell Crowe in A Beautiful Mind leaving his baby in the bathtub to drown. It's a violent homeless man claiming he's the rightful leader to the Mars Starfleet. It is not my husband. And to a degree, I was right. Schizophrenia is made up of positive, negative, and cognitive symptoms. Positive symptoms are things that are added, like hallucinations, delusions, movement disorders.
Negative symptoms are things that are taken away from your personality, which can come in the form of a lack of emotion, or anhedonia, which is the inability to experience pleasure. And then there are cognitive symptoms, which impair your ability to think, remember, and engage in the world. My husband is not a paranoid schizophrenic, meaning he doesn't experience positive symptoms very often. He's more what you would call a disorganized schizophrenic, although I don't think they use that terminology very much anymore. He's anhedonic, and he cannot think or engage in the world. But they don't make medications for those symptoms of schizophrenia. My husband has tried all iterations of antipsychotics over the last 4 months. None help him. He takes them to prevent psychosis, but those medications are developed to treat what we see manifest on the outside. He feels empty internally. He feels far away. My husband's personality was ripped away from him, and there is nothing that he can do about it. There is nothing that can bring his personality back. He tells me, I feel like I'm nothing. There is nothing like watching the person you love suffer in agony and know that there is nothing you can do. And here I am. My partner has become my patient. I'm essentially a single mother of 2. I feel like I should be more grateful, or at least more at peace with how things are. At least he's not violent. At least he doesn't tell me we need to buy an underground bunker because the apocalypse is tomorrow. But I am not okay. I am so angry. I'm angry that my son doesn't have his father all there. I'm angry that the person I love is in agony every second of his life. I'm angry that I might have to do this alone for the rest of my life. Or maybe I'm being dramatic. Maybe things will get better, and we will live out the rest of our lives happily. But today is not that day. I wish I could end on a hopeful note, but we are in the weeds, and I just don't know how this is going to end.
I call my parents and my brother every time I'm depressed. And at first they would freak out, but now they're like, it's okay, Sandra. And that helps a lot. Because every time I feel like I have no control over my life, they would just kind of remind me of it. And no, I wouldn't feel better immediately, but it sort of granted that feeling of comfort and security. You know, like, you'll make it out again. So I had a lot of support. I hear these stories about people who are depressed and they don't have anybody reaching out to them, and well, for me it was kind of the opposite. Like, I just wanted people to leave me alone, which sounds like such a shitty thing to say, but for me, when I'm depressed, socializing takes a lot of energy. I barely have enough energy to get out of bed, let alone talk to people. And I mean, looking back, even though I pushed people away, it still meant a lot that they would reach out to me and that they were adamant on making sure I was okay. And even though it was annoying, it probably kept me alive. I mean, every situation is different. If you feel like you know somebody who's going through what I went through, gauge what they want. Some people want constant attention, and others want to be left alone, so leave them alone, but don't abandon them. Just periodically make sure they're okay. And even though I didn't text back, and even though I pushed people away, it still meant a lot when I got a text that said, hey, are you okay? No, I wouldn't say I regret this experience, but even though it was awful, I'm so grateful that I went through it. I think I got a lot of things kind of sorted out. A lot of things, light was shed on, that needed light shed on, and I sort of discovered myself, which is such a cheesy thing to say, but I think I found a real part of me.
One could say the punitive system is cranking out more injured people than it had when they first got there. Now, there's some astounding statistics surrounding solitary confinement and mental illness, specifically PTSD. The United States houses 75,000 people in solitary confinement, and of those who were not mentally ill when they first got there, over 50% developed the inability to tolerate normal stimuli, such as running water, sudden noise, or sudden touch, and 75% of them become chronically depressed. Now, once you get out of prison, you can go get insurance, pick out a shrink, or do whatever you want to do, right? But not everyone knows how to do that. And I've been in and out of prison almost my entire adult life. So I know how the system works. It's no excuses, no BS. It's hard, it's difficult, and that's why a lot of people fail. They go into it with less skills than they had when they got out. Sometimes even worse. You know, I still have not been satisfied with any of my interactions with a doctor or a counselor. Yeah, it's nice to talk about it, but at the end of the day, that doesn't always help. And medication doesn't always help, especially when you've been addicted to drugs your entire life. So, what does that leave you with? How do you treat yourself? I don't know. But I found that talking about it helps. And that going to that prison and volunteering and helping those guys as a mentor, I probably get more out of it than they do. You know, I'm starting a business plan. And I'm starting a nonprofit to try to find a support system because there's not one. There's not one. And look, like I said before, I'm not on my soapbox saying, free the prisoners. That's not what I'm saying. Look, I guess all I'm saying is that this is a problem. This is a problem. No one really realizes that this is a problem.
I started therapy because one day at work there was this girl who kind of looked up to me. We were going through kind of the same thing. She was dealing with being a full-time student. She was working full-time. She was dealing with depression too. And one day she told me that she wanted to kill herself. So I got our manager and we talked about it. And my company has this program where you can get 6 free therapy sessions in your area. So we found her a therapist. And I just realized that I didn't want to get to that point again. So I reached out and found myself a therapist. And it's been really helpful. It's been a lot of figuring out how to take time for myself as opposed to spending it all with other people. You know, because I realized I had been spreading myself so thin, I wasn't giving myself enough time. And you know, I realized that there are times when I just need to be alone. You know, to process my day and my depression, just kind of work things out. You know, from my perspective, depression is like a stone in your chest, and it just gets heavier and heavier the sadder you get, and you can't get it out, and you can't get it off, or it's like a backpack with heavy textbooks, and you just have to carry it around all day, and it weighs you down. It's like a roller coaster, you know, but not the fun kind of roller coaster. You never know when it's going to go up, and you don't know when it's going to go down, and that can be frightening. I think that that's what makes depression so hard. You never know when it's going to come.
There are 3 specific events that led me to stop drinking and start living a life in recovery. The first was after my cousin's suicide. His memorial service was at a restaurant with an open bar. Oftentimes in our society, if you're having a good time, you drink. And if you're having a bad time, you still drink. So there was liquor at this occasion, and death is uncomfortable, so I drank to be comfortable, and ended up being very uncomfortable. I got blackout drunk at his service, and you'd think after that I'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm never drinking again. But with addiction consequences don't really stop you. The second event was my brother's birthday party. Not only did I pass out early, but I threw up in my sleep on his bed. And it was his birthday. But it had to be the third event that finally got me to realize that I had a problem with alcohol. I was at a casino with my friends. I got drunk, blacked out, and wandered off to explore the casino by myself. I was missing for hours, and my friends eventually had to call security. They eventually found me around 5 a.m., but right before that, my friends were about to head off to sleep, and their best hopes were finding me in the morning. Hopefully I wasn't kidnapped or anything. And I think that was really alarming for me, that anything could have happened and maybe something did. But I couldn't remember it. So that was the straw that broke the camel's back. Alcohol was not giving me the life that I wanted. I wanted to be in control of my life. So I decided to seek recovery, stay sober, and get healthy. Once I got the substance out of the way, I was able to focus on my mental health fully. It was such a process for me, but there were so many things that helped me along the way. And I think that anyone struggling in any facet doesn't need to feel ashamed or be condemned or put down for where they're at, because life is a process, and we're all on different wavelengths. If you live life today sober, that's a victory. If you get out of bed, for some people, that's a victory. I'm a huge fan of resilience. It's something that might not be hard for one person, can be extremely hard for someone else. Like once I was at the grocery store and I walked past the olive oil, and this light switch just kind of flickered off in my head saying, I'm going to buy alcohol. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. For some people, walking past the alcohol aisle can be a really big struggle. And for others, it's not an issue with them. The alcoholic looks at alcohol and their brain craves it. It finds dopamine in it. And with mental health issues, perhaps there's a lack of dopamine there. So our body looks at alcohol and says, this is your dopamine. This is what makes you happy. Even though it's destroying you from the inside out. That is a cycle in our brains. And I think a lot of people will stigmatize addiction as a choice and not a disease. Yes, I had a choice to use this substance. I didn't have a choice to become addicted to it.
Psychosis is scary. It's all scary. And when you're in it, you have no idea what's going on. You need people reassuring you. I had my family, but if you don't have your family, maybe you could have a friend or somebody who's calm and likes to be with you. The best support that I ever had was when I was going to a support group once a week, and there was a group of people who went to dinner beforehand. Peer support, the support of people your own age, is so important. I wish I knew that there were other people out there earlier. I work for NAMI, which is the National Alliance for Mental Illness, and I'm on their board for education. And one thing I like to do with NAMI is to try to get people together who may not realize that there are other people out there. There are 300 million people suffering from depression worldwide. So there's always going to be somebody out there who's suffering. And if you have depression, it's good to find somebody else so you don't feel alone. When I'm mainly depressed, having somebody there is the best thing. Because when you're alone, your mind just goes, and you get confused, and you can't think straight. You don't have to be talking to the person necessarily, but not being alone is the best thing.
I was locked up in that facility for the mentally ill, and I didn't know anyone. It was probably one of the scariest experiences of my life. So my dad flew in, and because he had power of attorney, he got me out of there. I took a week medical leave, and I went back home and I did this program called Compass. It's like an outpatient program for anxiety and depression, and it was super helpful. I got to meet so many kids my age with mental illnesses that related to me, and I learned so many coping skills and techniques. I found a new psychiatrist, I got put on new anxiety meds to take as needed for my anxiety attacks, and I even went back to school. I didn't know if I was going to stick it out through the whole semester or not, and I actually did have to drop a class because it just became too difficult for me to balance everything. But I'm just trying to push on from here, taking it day by day. Hopefully it gets better. I'm doing a full program at Compass over the summer when I get back home, and it's definitely scary to go to a program where you don't know anybody and you don't know what it's going to be like, but from my experience, the two things that have helped me more than anything in this whole entire process have been faith and treatment. And it's definitely scary to take steps forward to getting better, but sometimes you have to do things that you don't want to do, like finding a new psychiatrist or going to therapy or meeting new people. Meeting new people that have gone through the same thing as you can be so helpful and open your eyes to things you don't even understand. Lots of scary moments for sure, but it leads to better stuff in the future.
I think the best part is meeting people who genuinely care and who want to listen, because now I know that I have a great support system. But the worst part is realizing that there are lots of people that I thought were there for me and aren't. My depression has definitely ruined a lot of friendships. They all say that they don't want to have to deal with it. But my current friendships make my experience a lot better. Just listening to me talk or rant or cry, even if they can't figure it out, it's helpful in every way. Sometimes I just need someone there. They don't care if I'm sad. They'll hang out with me. They will try to include me in everything that they do. Because sometimes I just need someone there. I don't need advice. I don't need a solution. I just need a presence. I want to help as many people as I can, because I know that there are a lot of people who don't talk about it, and keeping it in can be harmful in more ways than one. In my experience, keeping it in almost made me commit suicide. So I don't want anybody to get hurt because they feel like they can't open up to anybody. If there's anything that I wish I had known earlier, it's that it's never over. And when I say that, I mean that my life isn't over yet. It's hard, but every time I am in a depressive episode, I just say to myself, this isn't the end. It's not over. You cannot let your brain be the winner of all this. It is not over. This is not the end, and I need to realize that.
This isn't a story that will end in how I've magically healed. There's debate, but I'm of the persuasion that OCD intrusive thoughts never truly leave you. You just become a master at living your own damn life instead of being governed by, the intrusive thoughts and debilitating thoughts as well. This isn't a story that ends in how I've been magically healed. There is debate, but I'm of the persuasion that OCD doesn't ever truly leave you. You just become a master at living your own damn life and don't let the thoughts govern you. I sincerely hope that my story can help someone out there and help them label it, disassociate it from themselves, and seek the care that they desperately need. I did. It's been months. I am so much better. I'm so much stronger, and I understand that I'm not allowed to let the thoughts govern my life. I'm not allowed to let them lead, but I'm allowed to feel everything I'm feeling. I tell OCD that I will sit still. I always hear the thoughts screaming and screaming and screaming, but today I turn around and I scream back. I tell them I know who they are and their secrets have been revealed. I tell it I will sit still. And for the sake of my 7-year-old self, terrified and confused, I scream again. I scream for her. I fight every day just to remember how to hold myself, to love myself. I do it for her.
The way I like to define recovery is that it's a pathway to a better life. It's not just being sober, it's living a life where you are the best person that you can be. So I love the life in recovery for someone who's struggling with mental illness or with drugs or both. Recovery is a lifestyle. And for me, recovery is having meaningful conversations and being intentional in relationships. I was not focused on my relationships or being a caring person when I was using substances. So the greatest parts of recovery for me are being an advocate, helping others, and focusing on those relationships that I didn't have before. My best friend is my biggest supporter because he listens to me compassionately. Oftentimes it's just letting me talk and not putting me down. And I love what my mom has been doing ever since she found out about my recovery. She just asks me once a month or so, how can I support you? What can I do for you? And even though I might not need anything, just hearing her ask makes me feel supported. And lastly, recovery offers a wonderful, fulfilling, and eye-opening lifestyle. If you are alive and not living, if you are breathing and you're not living that fulfilling life, that joyful life, that purpose, that hope, then recovery has so much to offer. I'm not saying that life is going to be sunshine and rainbows. It's not saying that problems don't exist. It's having a peace with those problems, seeking treatment when necessary, and doing the things that you don't want to do to get better. It's hard work. So I think that people in recovery are the strongest people.
Today, I am unafraid. I'm still so afraid.
The best thing for me when it comes to depression is rationalizing it. Even though it feels so heavy, it's like a disease. It's not a part of me.
What made me stronger is learning to use my resources, the things that I can do for myself and the people around me.
The best part is getting to see how much my family loves me. My husband is wonderful. He'll do anything to make sure I'm okay.
Going to the prison and talking to those guys is a mentor. I probably get more out of it than they do.
The two things that have helped me throughout this whole entire process are faith and treatment. But one thing that I've learned is that if you do go through treatment, the best thing you can do is put in. The more you put in, the more you get out of it.
I don't really have regrets. Even though it's been really hard, my journey has brought me to where I am today. I don't know who I would be if I didn't go through what I've experienced.
Breathe the thoughts in, then breathe them out. Don't offer your 2 cents, don't barter, don't analyze. Reassurance is an addiction. One more hit will not bring you closer to feeling better.
It's all scary and you need people reassuring you.
I just want somebody that's going to look at me without that wall.
I'm very thankful that I had friends who didn't judge me or condemn me for using drugs, even though I knew I had a problem.
To trust that the friends I have aren't going to run for the hills immediately when I do or say something wrong is terrifying. Having friends to remind you of what's true is huge.
If you have a friend who's depressed, the best thing you can do is be there with them so they don't feel alone.
If you're a friend of someone with depression, then reach out. Don't just sit there and think, oh, they're in therapy, so they're okay, or, oh, they'll come to me if they need help. That's not true. My therapist helps me for an hour once or twice a week, but she can't help me all the time.
With suicidal ideation, someone needs to intervene by asking the question, do you feel like killing yourself? It's an awkward question, but get over it. That is somebody's life. I think when someone asks that serious of a question, almost always will the other person answer honestly. No one usually asks, so they don't say anything.
When you have depression and negative thoughts, it's all scary. So you need to have someone there who can make you feel supported and know that those thoughts are not scary, they're just thoughts.
Struggling with an eating disorder or mental illness can feel really isolating because you don't want anyone to know about it and you're ashamed of it yourself. But when you do choose to open up, it brings you into community and it lightens the load and lifts the burden.
I would definitely say reach out.
Don't keep it underground. It happens to so many people. It's just kept so secret.
Find someone that you can trust and tell them your story. Let them know how they can help you. Because the more that you talk about it, the more you'll find people who will give you the world if you just let them in.
I didn't find support until this semester because I didn't want anyone to know about it, and that was not helpful.
Life begins at the end of your comfort zone.
Just take it day by day, week by week, month by month. Just go with the flow.
Everything is as okay as it can be at this point, so I'm thankful for that. Or at least I'm trying to be.
I have many good days and many bad days. Relapse is a part of recovery.
It's okay. Like, it's okay. Just go with the flow. Everything will be better eventually. And I know that it doesn't seem like that now, but know that there are people that have gone through what you're going through. And they're still alive. You can do it too.
Treatment works and recovery happens.
You're only going to feel this way for a certain period of time. And it's going to change. Something is always going to change.
If only I could tell my 7-year-old self, you're not bad, my love. You're scared. Cry here. I'll hold you. I love you. You are gentle. You are good.
It sucks. It really freaking sucks, and you just have to push through it. You can't go under, you can't go over. But I believe that the bad leads to the good. There is always light at the end of the tunnel.
We live so bravely, us with OCD. We step and we walk, we run and we sprint, knowing the breath could be knocked out of us at any moment. But you know what? Look at us go. With everyone else, we are still going, doing.
It's tough. It's really hard, and it's okay to still be going through it.
I want people to know that, like, depression and anxiety or whatever crappy feeling you're feeling is not something you should be ashamed of.
You just have to keep pushing forward.
There are brighter days ahead.
Rest now.